part 2 of the presentation, Foresight Methods, and I will begin with a very important method that's been developed over the years in futures or foresight studies. It's called environmental scanning. So first of all, I'd like to draw your attention to this quote from a book, Futures Thinking for Social Foresight by Dr. Richard Slaughter and Marcus Busse. New issues, trends, dangers are arising all the time. But unless someone is watching and listening, the early signals are lost. Careful scanning is necessary because without it, we lose the lead time necessary to respond to developing processes. The lead time. It's a very important concept because the lead time gives us the time to make the adjustments that we need to be able to adapt to the changes that we see coming in the future. And so with the lead time, we have many choices. We can, and many resources that we can, strategies that we can use. But if we lose that lead time, if we wait until the crisis is already upon us, for example, and I'm thinking in particular like global climate change, probably the biggest example, then we don't have a lot of choices. Once we lose that lead time, because it takes time to respond. Some things can take years, if not decades, to respond to. For example, like I mentioned, global climate change. You have to change the infrastructure, for example, so that it can accommodate alternative energies. You can make that transition to alternative energies. You can't just do it overnight. It takes time. It takes at least a decade or so to do that. And we had that time. Scientists were warning about this several decades ago. And if we had listened and used their wise foresight, then we could already be in a sustainable economy that is also environmentally friendly. It's not polluting and driving the greenhouse gases up to the extent that they are today. But we didn't use that lead time. What did the oil and gas companies do? Immediately they saw it as a PR problem. So they began to fund millions and millions of dollars into anti-climate change propaganda and legislation, destroying the lead time that we needed to respond to this crisis. Now, I'm not saying that it's over yet, but we've several decades already, we've done virtually nothing. So in the window of opportunity, it doesn't stay open forever. It does close eventually. And I think we're starting to realize that, but hopefully what little time we have to make some very important changes. But anyway, we'll talk about that again in another presentation in the future. I just wanted to point out the importance of environmental scanning, and that is, in being able to detect the weak signals, the early signals, and then, respond when you have lots of lead time. Now, but what is the value? What is environmental scanning, and what is its value? Again, it is a continuous, broad exploration of information sources with the goal of finding the evidence of the future in the present. In other words, the future's already here. We just have to be able to see it. There's evidence of it here. But the problem is we don't see it half the time. So that's what environmental scanning does. It helps us to be able to find the information that will show us the evidence of the future in the present. So, first of all, it's an ongoing effort to identify significant changes in the world that's beyond the organization or group that's doing the scanning. Systematic survey of current print media, websites, experts, and so on, looking for indications of change that are likely to be of future importance. And it's focused mainly on trends, the changes over time, patterns that have developed, there's, that refers to history, like I mentioned before, instead of just particular events that are taking place more or less in the present. The sort of single quick change, that may not have any relevance, really, usually doesn't, to the future. The origins is in military intelligence during the Cold War, for geopolitical strategy over a long period of time. Back then it was called scan, clip, and review. That was before the internet. I think we can probably revise that to scan, copy, paste, and review process. Environmental scanning. Now, again, why is environmental scanning important? Well, for one thing, now if we look at, in a business environment, when you have an environment, a rapid innovation and change, how can you get a sustainable competitive advantage? Well, one of the things you can do is to learn faster than your competitors. And that's what, environmental scanning helps you to do. Learn faster than your competitors. It's used to spot, identify, evaluate, and track ideas that might shape our future world. Provides a 360-degree view of the environment that the organization operates in, like everything that surrounds the organization. And it encourages tiny surprises while it prevents major surprises. Why do you want to encourage tiny surprises? Because tiny surprises are usually those little things that most people don't see that you see. That's why it's a surprise, and that's why it's tiny. And if you can find it, then you can use it for your advantage and get ahead of your competitors. Why does it prevent major surprises? Because major surprises in the future are usually not good because they tend to destabilize the company, and sometimes to such an extent that it can, be fatal. So you don't want major surprises in the future. So if you see them, then you can start to adapt to them, prevent them, and if not, at least you can adapt in a way or be prepared for them that you will survive. And it helps to identify trends. Now, trends are what drives the baseline future. Extrapolations, in other words. But weak signals, as I mentioned before, early signals usually occur, the trends usually occur, they're more history-oriented, whereas weak signals oftentimes can be in the present. And they are the things that maybe most people overlook, but you see and you think it has some implication for the future. They could actually change the baseline future. These are the alternative futures. Okay, I mentioned before it helps an organization to bring the outside in, right? And so this gives us an illustration of what that means. For example, you have your organization, right? And of course you have to pay attention to your internal dynamics. Chiefly the human resources, the people that work in your company. Of course, that's something that's very important that you need to be aware of. But also you then are situated within an industry or profession. And so you have to understand the factors that are immediately surrounding your organization. And most people do. You wouldn't be working in that organization if you didn't know about that. You need to know. You would know automatically the industry trends, what kind of standards and regulations that are, affect your organization, have been and currently are affecting your organization, mergers and acquisitions that have been taking place, and your competitors, and then that, the competition, of course, you're aware of that, you know about that, you understand your customers, Okay, those are all things that most organizations or industries, most companies, they know about that. That's what they focus on mostly. They're experts on those things, those factors. But what they normally aren't experts on, are not really aware of, are things that are outside of the organization, those global drivers of change that I mentioned before. And what are some of those, for example, what are some of those outside factors that maybe most companies are not aware of, but you want to be aware of because this could be the difference. This could make a difference to your future. And that is, what kind of laws and regulations are being developed today outside of this, not immediately affect your organization, but it's something new outside of your organization and your industry that could have some impact on your industry. What are some of the emerging technologies? How about the energy and the environment? What's going on there? Social change, geopolitical developments, economic developments, and generational change. These are the factors outside. You want to bring these inside to the organization. You have more knowledge about those things, then you can, again, have a decisive advantage over your competitors and a better chance of surviving, especially if there's intense competition. So bring the outside in. Now, this brings me to an analysis of it's related to environmental scanning. It's emerging issues analysis. And this is what's called the S-curve. It generally has a 30-year lifespan. And this is something that's been discovered through research to generally true about, I'm not going to say all issues, but generally most issues follow this S-curve. And it begins with, and the 30-year time span. So where you have emerging issues that, again, this is where the weak signals are when they're emerging, but eventually they become trends, and then after they become trends, you see the curve starts to level off, and becomes accepted or integrated within the society, and then you find certain problems are encountered at that particular time. And that brings us up to the present, right? So, while solving emerging issues tends to lead to little political payoff, because voters typically are not going to reward the leaders, the political leaders, for solving tomorrow's problems. But at the same time, they can help minimize harm, and they indeed can help cities and other organizations respond far more swiftly to emerging challenges. Let's look at this in a little more detail now. Just to give an example. So here we find that in the beginning, when the issue starts to emerge, you have your innovators, who are aware of the weak signals, the early signals. There's few cases, usually a local focus, and only people who are really become aware of it are like scientists, artists, radicals, mystics, futurists. They're looking at the fringe, the fringe. And then as the issue starts, more and more people become aware of it. You have the early adopters who want to take advantage of it. They see it as a great opportunity, that they can get in on the ground level, so to speak. And it starts to become a trend. Once newspapers, magazines, websites, journals, blogs, and stuff start to pick up on it and spread it around, informational wise. And that's where most scanning takes place, here, and when it starts to become a trend. After it becomes a trend, you have the late adopters here, and then you have the late majority, and it becomes mainstream. And then government institutions, start to integrate it into the society. And of course, that's where most information today about it occurs, when it's mainstream, And you have your laggards too, that are very late. Now, as I mentioned before, I didn't really mention this, but this is research that was from the work of Graham Molitor and Wendy Schultz and Everett Rogers about the S-curve, the 30-year time frame for emerging issues. So, how does this affect your scanning or environmental scanning, as I mentioned? Plan to scan. Good scanning, catches emerging developments early. That's the whole idea, is to get a jump ahead, of the trend. Before it becomes a trend. You recognize it's going to be a trend. Or when it starts to become a trend. Early awareness, right? That's when you want to be able to catch it. Because that can be when you have the greatest advantage. And in the idea creation, usually you can find this, like in the very beginning, it'll be just like science fiction or visionary works, fringe publications, and so on. And then when it starts to become, a trend, there is some early awareness of it, and you can find that in scientific, technical literature, industry publications, and so on. Once it becomes popular, once it starts to, it reaches the top of the curve there, that's when it starts, when the news periodicals and the mass media coverage start to pick up on it. And then eventually it becomes integrated into the society, and that's where you find it in educational, historical material, and legislation. Now, this process has been accelerated. In fact, accelerated means it can happen in a shorter period of time by the global saturation of communications technology. So, let's look at the environmental scanning. And you can see like 5 phases of the environmental scanning process. First of all, you have to understand the need. When you go online, for example, if you don't know what you're searching for, you can get lost easily. You can get overwhelmed with data overload. So you have to understand what you are searching for. Understand the need, especially within your particular organization. Being able to specify exactly what you want, how you want to frame your search. It's very important, because then that can help you, to find the best results, that's most relevant, rather than, wasting time on irrelevant information that, that you just don't need. It's just a waste of time. So then once you frame your search, then you have to start planning. What kind of sources and methods are you going to implement, right? So you frame the search, and then you plan the search before you execute it. Now, execution is the third stage, actually. When you start to that's basically monitoring sources, performing searches, and so on. Now, when you find information that you think, through scanning, you just look for the information that you think is relevant. You don't, at that point, do any kind of intensive reading or analyzing or any of that. It's like an Easter egg hunt. You just try to find the Easter eggs. You're just looking for the treasure, and you think, oh, this looks like a treasure. Okay, I'm going to store it. I'm going to check it out later. I don't know. Maybe It may not be a treasure, but it looks like it could be. So I'm going to save it. I'm going to copy, paste it, and put it in my file, for my search results. Okay? Then once you've gotten, a pretty large file, let's say you got like 100 or so hits, scanning hits, no, now I have to begin to determine the relevance and the implications. I have to scrutinize it. I have to make sense of them. Which ones are really, do I think are relevant or really are treasures? And which ones are, well, I thought this was a treasure, but now that I see it in more detail, I realize, this is not going to work. So you start to refine your results in the sense-making stage. Once you have your results, then you have to go back and, take note. Maybe you should take notes as you go along, but anyway, even if you didn't, you need to go back and think about the whole process. How did it work? Did this process go well? Did I have the right plan, the sources and methods? Did I frame it right? Did I really understand the need, and was the planning, sources, and methods relevant? I mean, was it useful, helpful? Did I monitor and perform the searches well, Did I come up with some good results of this, or are there some things I need to change? So you go through each of the stages, you go back and you review and adjust the system so that you can, again, start all over again for maybe a different, something else that you need to search for, to scan for, sorry. Okay? So it's a 5-stage process. And here's some guidelines for scanning. These are just general tips. You might find some of them useful, maybe not, But, you find it. First of all, you realize the future's already here. You just need to find it. You look for clues, not comprehensive evidence. You go deep, explore, focus broadly. You don't ignore evidence to the contrary. Have an open mind. Take a global perspective. Look for the novel, the unfamiliar, the uninteresting. Look for interactions and combinations, too. Study the history, in order to understand the context, and make it an ongoing scanning and an ongoing integrated activity, and a shared social process as well. Identify the credible sources, and of course, it should be relevant to the organization. And finally, you can get really, you can spend a lot of time on this, and you can spend several hours without realizing it, and it can be almost kind of addictive, just like the internet in general, So every now and then, and especially if you want to try to get a fresh look at everything, maybe you should just take a break, get out from behind the computer. The future isn't completely online. Online is definitely, a great, most predominant way of, scanning these days. But remember, it's good to get out, get some fresh air, get some exercise, come back later, and then you have a whole, different perspective, So this is just a few guidelines for scanning. And when you get something that's relevant, it's called a scanning hit. It's an event or new information that you find that you believe presents evidence of future change that's relevant to the domain, to the way that you framed it in the beginning. And there are basically three ways that you react to a scanning hit. First of all, one that confirms, reinforces your current personal or organizational view of the future. And you say, okay, I knew that, but it's good to know. It's good to know I'm not the only one. This makes it seems more valid to me now that I find out that this is, other people are saying the same thing, So, this confirms, how I thought things were going to happen in the future. On the other hand, you might get a hit that contradicts your current personal or organizational view of the future. You don't want to discard it just because it contradicts what you thought was going to be. Okay? You say, that changes things. Wow. Okay. And then you find another kind of hit is one that makes you aware of a new possibility, a new potential future state, something that you just did not know about, completely new. And you say, wow, that really opened my eyes. And here are a few examples of scanning hits, just to give you an idea about the kind of things that you could come up with, mostly from the media, all from the media, really. Like here we say the Christian Science Monitor. Now, each of these scanning hits are not necessarily, I don't know if they're related to each other. Maybe. Yeah, it depends on how you framed your search, but this is one that's related to demographics. Like if you have some sort of demographic, something related to that, in the future, that that could have some impact. Like for example, China could grow old before it grows rich. Or if you have something that has to do with the resources or the future of the planet, for example, it's global or planetary, this hit would be good. Another Earth is needed to meet humans' demand for resources. Or if you have, if your topic is something to do with the future of transportation. Okay, has our crush on cars run its course? Or alternative energy. Engine could boost future fuel economy by half. Okay. Now, these are just some examples. Again, it depends on how you framed your search. What it is you're searching for. But these all could be good results or treasures or scanning hits, right? In your hunt. And here are just an example of just some sources that we use, mostly online. Where you look, all the lot of different places to look. This depends on how much time you have to invest. And what you're doing it for. If you're doing it for a company, then all of these sources would definitely be something that you would want to consider. And it's like you're working on a 6-month or 1-year project, and you're working on it every day. You look at everything you possibly can get your hands on. If you're in my class and we have a half a semester and you're doing as part of your project or something, environmental scanning project, you have to be, you can't, practically you wouldn't be able to use all these sources. Mostly you'd, be looking at online sources, everything that you can find that's online. So, but these are some examples that might, you would definitely want to at least look at and see if it's relevant or not. How do you classify them? And once you do, find some good sources, how do you make sense of them? And one way to do that is to classify them. Then that helps us also to bring the big picture, in easier if we see that if we can sort of put them in categories that we can classify them, so it helps to make sense, And one of the you see one of the acronyms is very common in futures or foresight studies is STEEP: social, technological, environmental, economic, political, and in some cases we can add demographic, so we can say STEEP plus D. And you can see all those what all those categories actually mean. Well, Yeah, I think, you know, as much as possible, you should try to make scanning something that's fun to do. I mean, not, you know, something that you dread or is full of drudgery, but it's a learning journey. You're scouring the world, you know, online to look for the future. So, you know, like I said, if you can get the kind of, you know, excitement that you get, like as a, you know, as a child, you're going on an Easter egg hunt. You know, if you can have that same kind of enthusiasm, then you know, scanning can be fun. It's a learning journey. And you want to seek out and learn from future makers, innovators, future seers, thinkers. It's an immersive experience with the goal of changing worldviews, challenging popular opinion, and being provocative. Exposure to ideas and people that are different than the usual suspects, then analysts tend to herd around conventional wisdom. So anyway, try to develop a sense of adventure and discovery when you get involved in environmental scanning. Thank you.